Today I'm on Turtleback Trail in China Camp Park here in Marin County, and I want to talk about how this government shutdown is causing millions of people to go broke right now. Mostly government employees, but remember the other day when we talked about the SNAP benefits and all the problems that grocery stores are going to have because of these SNAP benefits not being renewed? In the same way, the government shutdown affects many other sectors of the economy as well. It's not just government workers. But the government's been closed for about a full month now. And federal workers, for example, who have missed two paychecks already, are now using credit cards to pay their bills. They're visiting food banks and reviewing their bank accounts, trying to figure out what their next move is going to be and how long they're going to be able to survive without a salary. Well, the answer is they're not going to be able to survive much longer under these conditions. We can look at an example of this one woman, 53 years old, who works as a government publishing office staffer, and she's been going without pay for a month now. And she says she's barely eating and she is subsisting on coffee and protein shakes right now. She said she's already sold everything she could find in her house, including two old iPhones. She has now started a GoFundMe to help cover her expenses. And she's hoping to drive for DoorDash to supplement her income, but her car was repossessed after she missed a loan deadline because of the shutdown. So now she's without a car. So this is having some major impact on people across the board. And really, this government shutdown seems to be going nowhere. They're not really making any progress, and there's no sign that it's going to be over anytime soon. And of course, the end of the SNAP benefits is becoming a huge problem. And I saw a bunch of stories today about how different cities and states are actually trying to partially fund the SNAP program on their own for now, hoping that it's going to bridge the gap between now and when the government actually reopens. But it looks like there's no end in sight. Of course, they're probably going to at some point, but only having a couple weeks of funding on hand isn't really going to go very far. So as of right now, of the nation's 2.1 million federal workers, more than 750,000 have been furloughed and sent home without pay for a whole month, and hundreds of thousands of more people are working without a salary. So that's well over 1 million people who are not getting paid and have to still show up to work and not get paid, just for the government alone. Not to mention all the people who are affected by contract work that is usually done by the federal government that's not happening right now either. One government worker said, I could probably go through another couple of weeks before I'm going to have to take on serious credit card debt and serious loans. And according to the data, about 1/6 of federal workers make less than the median national salary of $62,000 per year. So a chunk of them don't make a whole lot of money, but obviously that means that the rest of them, the other 5/6, probably make more than that. So that kind of brings me to my next point that I wanted to make and why I wanted to talk about this story, because anybody who's been following my channel for at least a few months knows very well that one thing I keep telling people is to get out of debt. Don't have a car payment. Don't be making payments on purses and shoes and whatever else that you thought it was a good idea to buy with buy now, pay later. You need to be earning an income that is substantially more than what your monthly expenses are. You need to have more than one source of income, so that way if something like this were to happen and your one income source goes away, well, you still have something else to supplement. Anybody who's been listening for a while knows that that's what people should be doing. Yet so few people do it, and this government shutdown exposes that, and it exposes the fact that people just are not financially equipped to be without an income for more than a month. When I was working full time as a real estate agent, it was not uncommon to go a month or longer with receiving zero income and still having no idea of when your next paycheck might come in. Because when you're working in sales like that, sales might happen. Sometimes they don't happen, even if it looks like it's going to. It can fall through. Purchase contracts fall apart for all sorts of different reasons, or people can't make it to the closing table, or they change their mind. Things like that happen. So income was very unreliable. But because I always had an emergency fund ready to go, none of these things affected me. That's just what everybody should be doing right now. If you can't make it more than a month without having to go into debt in order to pay your bills and survive, it's kind of pathetic, guys. I don't care what your salary is. These government workers that are on the lower end of things at $62,000 a year still make more than I made in most years doing real estate. That's the reality. So if I could do it, they could do it. But people don't. People overspend. People buy things they can't afford. They don't live within a budget. They don't live within their means. And then they get walloped with a huge surprise like this when all of a sudden they can't pay their bills because of a job loss. So I hope a lot of people who are in this situation now are kind of like learning from their own experience of what to do and what not to do in the future, and kind of use this as a learning experience to make sure next time something like this happens, they're going to be able to pull themselves out of it. Or in the case of this other family here, where this one government worker, she makes about $100,000 per year at her job, and her husband makes significantly less in a different job that's not with the government. But her salary is what basically allowed her family to afford an apartment and keep up with the lifestyle that they had. And now even she's using credit cards now to supplement their income. So, I mean, here's a family that was making probably at least 130 grand a year. I doubt that the husband makes less than that. They don't say, but 130 grand a year is significantly above the median household income in this country. Okay, median household income is $80,000. This family makes $50,000 more than the median national income, and they already have to turn to credit cards after just a 1-month shutdown, guys. She's now having to resort to buying only the cheapest groceries, no meat, pretty much frozen pizza and frozen dinners. They had to sit down and tell their kids that they wouldn't be doing anything for Thanksgiving this year, and that Christmas was probably going to be only one gift per person. And it's like, yeah, as much as that sucks, you probably should have been making sacrifices like that earlier. So that way you don't ever find yourself in a situation like this. But people kind of wait until it's too late. They wait until they actually have to do something about it, like now. And they got really lucky because her cousin ended up sending her a check in the mail in order to pay for her rent in October. And they said if they didn't get this money, then they had no idea how they were going to pay their rent. So you got a family living on at least 130 grand a year, living paycheck to paycheck, that doesn't have enough money to pay the rent next month, even when times are good and you have a job. And here's a quote from this person. She says, "Usually I'm the kind of person who will have backup plans, and right now there isn't one. I'm so scared." Well, you should have had the backup plan before you got laid off. And I know we can all sit here and talk all day about should've, would've, could've. It's all too late now, right? But the whole point of bringing this up is to highlight the lesson of having financial security before it becomes an issue. That's the whole point. You can't do anything about a layoff after you've already been laid off and you didn't do anything to prepare for it. That's what I've been telling people on this channel for years now, because the writing's been on the wall for the past few years that things have been getting progressively worse, and they have been. So even people that have just been making small steps each month over the past couple of years in preparing for a situation like this are miles ahead of anybody who just continued to live paycheck to paycheck and then got blindsided like, oops, I can't pay the bills anymore. And I know this video might sound a little bit harsh and a lot like tough love, like a lot of told you so moments and things like that, but I did tell you so. So there's really no excuse for not being prepared. It's one thing to be prepared and do everything right like some people have done, and then just be out of work for like a year and a half and blow through your emergency funds and now have to start dipping into retirement and taking loans and going into debt. That's a little bit different, guys, because those people, even though they prepared for the worst case scenario, they hit the worst case scenario and actually was worse than the worst case scenario. And through no fault of their own, they're getting into trouble. But at least they did what they could to prepare, and nobody can really prepare you for being out of work for more than a year. Nobody really ever thinks something like that could happen to them. But because of how bad this job market is right now, that's becoming more and more the norm. And check this out. Some of these government workers are out there looking for another job right now, but a lot of businesses are very hesitant to hire government workers because they're pretty sure that once the government reopens that they're all going to quit. So no business wants to invest their resources into training you and onboarding you into their business only to have you quit, 2 weeks or 6 weeks later when everything gets resolved. Even if it's a few months later, let's say it takes until next year for the government to reopen, that's not very long to be working at a company. And these companies don't have a large incentive to bring somebody on like that. Other people who've been laid off from the government said that they have stopped eating out, they have canceled all their streaming services, they have canceled all their travel plans, and don't drive when it's not necessary. A lot of the same common things that you guys said that you're doing right now to cut back on your personal expenses. And this month they had to dip into their savings in order to pay last month's rent. And they're scrambling to find another source of income to avoid draining down everything they've socked away. So this couple is in a little bit better position because at least they have some money saved and they can pay the rent. They have savings for it. They're not sitting there saying, oh, I don't know what we're going to do because we didn't get a paycheck last week. But it sounds like they probably only have a couple of months worth of savings built up before they're going to have to dip into retirement savings or go into debt to pay. So you see just how having a few extra months saved up can make a big difference for people. And also, this guy's really out there hustling. He says, I will pretty much do anything right now. I will work retail. I will drive for Uber. I'll work at a grocery store for a little bit if I have to, whatever it takes. And that's kind of the attitude people need to have when they're in a dire situation like this. And I have no doubt that somebody who is a little more prepared than somebody living paycheck to paycheck and goes into it with that can-do attitude is going to be able to make it through a situation like this much better than somebody who was completely unprepared and just thought they were going to be able to go paycheck to paycheck forever. And unfortunately, money troubles have a negative impact on relationships. One couple talks about how they're grumpier more and end up fighting more because they're having to pull out their savings and pay for things, and not receiving an income puts a big strain on the family, which no doubt it does. And some people are even going to therapy right now to try and get through hard times like this, but they're coming to the realization that they might not even be able to continue doing that because therapy costs money. And that's not a priority when you're just trying to be in survival mode. But I really want everybody who watches my channel to take close notes of how people are reacting to this situation and how they could have actually prevented being in this situation from the beginning. It seems like none of them had a secondary source of income, because if they did, they wouldn't be having nearly as much financial trouble as they're having right now. So that's a big part of the problem that a lot of people have. And I realize that you never used to have a second source of income, guys, but this is 2025, almost 2026. It's the new reality. It's the world we live in. Inflation has pushed the cost of living far too high, and it's just what you have to do if you want to be financially secure.